With that being said, welcome to our Academy training segment. Welcome to our Academy training segment. This is our segment where we, talk about some stuff where we want to kind of help you grow as a player, kind of some newer things to introduce. And tonight, our topic is essentially what is the Shadows of the Galaxy set to meta, and what do you got to prepare for going into Planetary Qualifier season? And it's funny because I'm doing all these hand gestures and you can't see it because I have my camera tilted. So I bet Alex is like, what the hell? Why has he got all these stupid like hand gestures going? It's a bad habit.
I talk with my hands all the time. So
fair enough. All right. Well, I feel better. I feel better that it's me and not you. So anyway, with that being said, Alex, I don't know. I think I let you kick this off. I think last time we did this, I think I let you kick this off. And essentially what I want to do is we want to talk a little bit about, the different decks. And I thought we'd start with Sabine, right? Because Sabine is one of the top decks that you're going to run into. I don't think it's the best deck in the game. A lot of people do. I do think it's a really good deck, and it has at least a 40% win rate against almost everything. I think that's like the lowest we've seen it win. So I thought we could start off by kind of talking a little bit about this and talk a little bit about, what is going on with Sabine and how it fits in the meta. So I have two Sabine decks. This one is the one that won the Manchester, and this is the one we'll cover first. And then we have one that won a Sword Championship this week, and they've changed it a little bit and started tweaking it to add a few other things to it. So let's talk a little bit about the more upgraded set to standard Green Sabine deck that we have.
Yeah, so this Green Sabine is actually more, incidentally, it's more Mandalorian focused, but it's not, more importantly, it's a not Rebel focused Sabine. So you got, double R2D2, triple Clone Deserter, double Timely Intervention, triple Daring Raid, triple A-Wing, triple Sabine, double Inspire Your Mentor, double Katsu, triple House Cast Soldier, triple Echo Base, triple For a Cause, triple Sundari Peacekeeper, triple Cassian, triple Fang Fighter, triple K2SO, triple Darksaber, triple Poe, and triple Wrecker. So this is more like, let's stack a bunch of damage and experience. We'll spread it around, just increase the attack, and keep it going with, just having really good quality pieces.
Yeah, and a lot of the Timely is a little bit newer, but that Dark Saber, right? So you have your Dark Sabers, and you have your Wing Leaders and your Fleet Lieutenants, and those are your kind of your 3 pressure point cards that you use when Sabine likes to come out, right? Depending on what the board state is. Like, those Dark Sabers are deadly, especially if they have another Sabine unit out. Like, that's super fun to deal with.
Yeah, and the Mandalorian-based one, right? You have, like, Sundari's, Housecast, Katsu's, Fang Fighters, and other Sabines, like you were saying. And the Rebel ones, you generally run less Dark Sabers. Just, 2, 2 as opposed to 3, right? But,
yeah,
the Rebel version is still, very good. You got all that Rebel synergy. It's your classic Green Sabine. So,
and so the reason this deck does well, right, is because it's an aggro deck that has the ability to morph, right? So it can hit your base super hard, or it can play a little bit of like a mid range and kind of like slow down and then just slam things in the end. Set 1, we saw Sabine do nothing but just go face for the most part. This deck goes face as well, but at the same time, they have the ability to not go face it, to take care of some of your units. Poe, for example, and Wrecker, 2 of the big new additions to this deck, right? And then Cassian is like your late game sneaky character. Which, by the way, if you play Scanning Officer, you can ruin a Sabine turn 1 play. I'll tell you right now, if Sabine gets Cassian turn 1, they are resourcing that every time, because that is a great game ender. Especially against decks that can't heal fast enough or prevent their units. Like, all of a sudden, here comes, you claim because you played all your cards, and here comes a Cassian because they already swung with 3 of their units. You've taken a couple off the board. You're done. Boom. Here comes Cassian pushing that 3 damage. And the next turn, now they got For a Cause that comes in, right? So I think, like, the idea behind that Cassian, that's one smuggle card that I guess they have Timely Intervention now is a newer one too, to give them a second ECL. But really, it's that Cassian that's coming in and saying, "Hey, hold on a second." I mean, and can you imagine smuggling Cassian out and then having enough resources to play Rebel Assault 2 on top of that? So stupid.
Yeah, I mean, like Cassian also works pretty well in like the Rebel version, right? Of it, that they run red 3, so now he's swinging in for 4 instead of 3, and that's just a passive. It's not like could have really done anything about that. And if you're running the Rebel version, they also have like the Fighters for Freedom, right? And that also triggers with Cassian because you are playing him. You're just smuggling him in instead of playing him from your hand. So you do an extra damage off of that. So if you have both of those, that's just like 5 damage out of nowhere that you couldn't account for.
Mm-hmm.
And that is enough to either swing or win games itself.
Yep. So normally when we talk about these things, if you think about it, right, you have your control versus mid-range versus aggro, right? And what beats aggro? Control typically, right? Or mid-range. I'm sorry, is it mid-range that beats aggro?
It's all over the place with this game, honestly. I like mid-range will like it's hard to explain.
Mid-range has a better play into this than the control, and vice versa. And the control is better into mid-range, and aggro is better into control. That's on a high level card game wise. That's what it is. But I don't know, Alex. What do you feel in terms of like how this deck is played, right? Like, so if you're walking into a tournament and you're not taking Green Sabine, and you gotta face off against this deck, what are you looking for specifically playline wise to try to stop? And we'll pick on the non Mandalorians deck first, because I think the other Mandalorian, the actual Mandalorian deck, is a little bit faster when it comes to certain things because of the fact that you can buff things with your Darksaber easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like the Rebel version of Sabine, it's so you're playing against it is either try to have units that trade well, like you can trade not a 1-for-1 because they'll play more units than you. If you have a lot of Sentinels, like Subblock Guards, your Phase 3 Dark Troopers are actually really good against this kind of stuff. Even like Echo-based defenders, your other Sentinels are really good. Out of hand damage is actually really nice, like open fire, or like Force Choke is what I've always done. When Sabine immediately comes out, they're holding their 4 resources. They got a Darksaber, just Force Choke Sabine, send her back, and they just get all sad. I've done that a couple times now. It's really funny. But like open fire takes care of stuff. They do have a fair amount of space units, so you have to also consider having some space presence in there, but also like ambushing into their own units and healing. So it's kind of like there's not one thing that will just like hard counter a lot of this stuff, but it's like a combination of like certain things that you can do in pretty much any deck that will. Again, having a lot of like Sentinel units helps. Healing really helps. You got Yularen and Crumb, like in our Palpatine decks, right? And that heals every time you play it. Heals 2 if you play Salacious and you have the Yularen out there. Blue tends to have things like top target and like make an opening. You got Vigilance, which will start taking out a lot of these units, honestly. So any like restore really delays the game more, which is what you want to do with Sabine. You want to like push past it until you can basically out damage them eventually, because their units that they're playing aren't going to do more than yours.
Yep. I think then the last kind of piece of it is if you are playing against them, like what are you sideboarding in, right? Are you going to sideboard in, like if you're running blue, do you sideboard in Vigilance and top target, or is Vigilance almost too slow to play against a deck like this?
I mean, I think most blue decks are already playing some Vigilance. Most of them, like the meta ones, are, especially if you're like a mono blue, that helps out a lot more. But like even the client also helps. He's a little bit slow, but still healing 5 is pretty nice if they're not like all gas. For sideboards, the stuff that I have is just like more Sentinels and then maybe some upgrade removal. Also, if they play a lot of units, they tend not to have the initiative, so something like the Star Viper is actually pretty solid against them. You could trade into like their X-Wings, red 3 A-Wing and all that stuff and still heal 2. So that's a really good option. You'll see that actually in like some sideboards for other Sabine decks. Just the edge out a little bit more. Or like the Fang Fighters with the upgrade removal or confiscate, so you can take off a Dark Saber or an experience that they're getting. It's a little bit more niche, but there's a lot of decks that also play upgrades. There's been a lot of times where people next to me have been like, I attached a Dark Saber to Sabine, and they're like, I'm playing the Fang Fighter. Get out of here. Sorry for your 4 resource loss.
Yeah.
Or also just the out-of-hand damage cards, right? They could always put more of those in there, like more open fires, more force chokes if you don't have a lot of them, or, your takedowns. Even a couple of Velda Dragons, really, honestly, because of the Wreckers and the Pose. And if they don't attach the Darksaber to Sabine Leader, you can take that out with a Velda Dragon.
Yeah, agreed.
So let's move quickly and kind of talk a little bit about the Mandalorian version, because this is kind of a newer build version that we haven't seen be super popular, but it's obviously got very similar mechanics. Adding those timelies in there, obviously they want those ambushes to get those things off like a lot more.
I don't know. To me, like having timely interventions in Sabine just seems. I keep hearing a bunch of people go back and forth. Some of them keep adding it in there. Some of them are just like, I played it and then I just took it out because I'd rather have something else. Just like, more ambushes. It's better in the aggro mirror. So it's fine. I'm just surprised it's not like sideboarded then.
Yeah.
Just like, timely ambushing out of Poe or Wrecker is incredible. Don't get me wrong. Or even K2SO, it seems less good against other things. But also like a Sandari, it's really nice because you just restore the 2 as well.
Yeah,
4 resources.
The other benefit for timely intervention too is just the option to just resource it. If you don't have anything that you want to immediately ambush early on, you can just grab it later on from Smuggle. You're paying 2 costs for it, but if you have enough cheap units and if you already built up your resource pile enough, then that's enough for you to bring in a unit in for ambush if you really, really need it, if you start falling behind on the damage race. So just having that as an option in your deck, just for those just in case moments. Timely intervention is just something that's just easy to sideboard if you need to and put it into your deck.
Yeah. Also, this one is running like Daring Raid 2, which is also either like a good finisher doing 2 damage to their base, or also just like picking off units that are a problem, or like they have sentinels and you're just like, well, I'm just going to do 2 damage to the sentinel, swinging with something. So you kind of 2-for-1 it, but you don't end up losing your units, which is how Sabine starts running out of gas when she has to trade 2 units for 1 unit. So it does alleviate that a little bit.
Yep. It's kind of silly. It's a little weird. They still have that for a cause in there, but they have reduced the number of like targets for a cause. I guess paying 3 for 3 out of hand damage is still probably pretty good. My guess is in this deck, you're still hitting 3, especially because you're probably resourcing those timelies most of the time.
And also, like, it still lets you stack the deck. So, like, if you got a whole bunch of garbage, you can discard them. Or if you got a whole bunch of, like, I need these cards quickly, you can, get them out of turn ahead.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about Green Sabine before we move on? I will say this is one of the biggest decks you're going to face. So this is definitely, preparation-wise, is something you're going to want to practice against.
It is pretty popular, and it's, like, slightly not budget anymore because of the Pose and the Dark Sabers.
Yeah.
It's definitely not budget, but it is definitely something that I think that you're going to see. And like I said, I think it has a high win percentage rate just because of the synergy aspects this deck has, and the fact that Sabine's able to ping extra damage. It just allows you to be it allows you to burn things down faster.
The real question is, which one do you like better?
For a non-aggro player, I like the Mandalorian one better personally. but I'm not an aggro player, so that's why I probably like it better. It's more combo-y, and I like that piece of it better.
I kind of like this particular Mandalorian one better too, just because it has the Sundaris and the clone deserters and they heal, so you get a better matchup and other aggro. Might be slower than the Rebel ones. You don't have like Rebel Assault and Wing Leaders and Fleet Lieutenants, but also you have healing. You have more saboteurs with the House Cast soldiers and Ketsu. And Ketsu's a little bit of upgrade removal as well, so it's
And
nice.
Ketsu is so good, again, especially against other Sabines. Just so good. Because she does not care if you put a Sentinel down.
Yeah.
She's just going to swing in and, oh, you dropped a Darksaber. Guess what? It's no longer, that Darksaber is no longer coming.
No, you only defeat upgrades of two costs or less.
Oh, it's 2 Colossus? Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, you can't kill a Darksaber, but you can kill things like shields and experience.
Experience, yeah.
And bounties. Bounties they place on you like top target.
True, fair enough. All right, is anything else we want to talk about for Sabines? All right, if not, let's move on and let's talk a little bit about Kira, because I know Alex thinks that it's the best deck of the whole game, so he wants to talk about it. I only put one version. There is technically 2 versions of this. There is a 30-point health version, which plays more like, in my opinion, it plays a lot more like Krennic or an Iden Green deck than this one does. But this is our Kira, not our, but this is the Kira Green that was made popular by Wu during Gen Con. I don't know. Did you read the last deck? I don't think we did we?
I did the Mando one just because that's a little bit newer.
All right. So this one, like, you have your Highborn Enforcers, you got your Inferno 4s and your Pike Sentinels and your Power of the Dark Sides. Those are kind of like your opening plays. If you get them, you got the standard 3 resupplies and the 3 standard, super laser techs to allow you for ramping. It does have only 1 takedown in it and only 1 maul, which I think is a crying shame, only having 1 maul, but you don't really need them with the ECL, and hopefully by the time you get to that, they also have added the 2 Avengers in for your end game, and then you have the Devastator and your Relentless kind of as your alternate pieces. Again, I'm not a proponent of having 1 of each. I would rather just have 2 Devastators or 2 Relentless, but that's just me personally. I'm just a different person than other people are.
No, one and one to me makes absolutely 0 sense. But I guess I didn't win Gen Con with the Green Kira deck, but I don't like, especially if you have 2 Avenger, right? Like, either stick to the more impactful killing of the units with the Devastator, or stick to the harder control that you're doing already with the Relentless.
Yeah. And or take both of them out and put walkers in. There you go. Like, walkers are a great drop trade. You could add these back to your sideboard. So the idea behind this deck, right, is this deck is a little bit faster than the green 30-point Kira. There is a bunch of videos. We did a video as well where I had my very first version of this back in June. I've been playing Kira. My son's been playing Kira. It's been a very popular thing in our household. I think the reason we're seeing it is because even though it is like somewhat of a control-y style deck, it also has the ability to keep up with the Sabines of the world, right? I will say it does struggle a little bit with the Kylos. Like, Kylo can get you down by that turn 3 to turn 4, and it becomes a little bit harder to keep up with a very, very fast aggro deck. And because Sabine has moved more towards that, there's still don't get me wrong, Sabine is still aggro, but it's got some higher end stuff that we weren't seeing as much before. Like, they want to play their pose, they want to play their records to finish their games off, whereas before it was just those guerrilla attack pods, right? So this deck, you have all sorts of ECL targets. You have the ability, if you're playing against a deck that is like a pillage deck, to skip your turn 1 so you have extra cards in hand. This deck does not need to get a High-Blown Enforcer down round 1, but you could put a High-Blown Enforcer down round 1, and then you can shield it, and now it's a 3/2 that could trade twice to some extent, right, with aggro decks. So that's kind of the style of this deck. The other thing I think that we don't see in here that I would like to see in here would be like in your sideboard would be a Count Dooku. I actually think Dooku is like super, super good. When you get to that, like if you're playing Sabine at that late game, you could put a Dooku down and kill something that they have on there that stops them from winning the game, and then now you've got a shielded unit, 5/4 unit that's just kind of a bully. It's not as good as like a Chewbacca, but you don't get Chewbacca in this deck, so I like Chewbacca, but not in this deck. I don't know. So what do we want to talk about first with this deck? What Alex? How about this? Why do you think this is not a meta deck?
JJ seemed like he was really jumping on something. Let him talk.
So, I mean, honestly, this deck just has a lot of tools. It has a lot of ways to help mitigate early in the game to like make sure that it keeps your opponent's numbers under control. And then as it ramps up with super laser attacks and resupply, then you have some really strong characters in Maul and Vader that can go help and finish off the game. And then you have Kira's ability that constantly puts out the amount of shields that you need to constantly keep those units alive. It can be very, very strong. It's a deck that doesn't have too many things that are strong, I guess, but it doesn't have as many weaknesses as well. It can adapt to both sides of the board. It can adapt to control decks. It can adapt to aggro decks, and just the use of the sideboard that helps adjust the deck to respond to those types of decks is what makes it very versatile. In the hands of a skilled player, I mean, you can find an answer against pretty much any style deck there is there. The end game for this deck is to make sure that you get to those larger units there, and then that's where you really gain the advantage on there. Saving that ECL for some of the later turns, just to make sure that you keep your opponent in check until you can bring out Snoke, until you can bring out your Avenger or Devastator on there. Just really helps cement the game on there. The main issue is just trying to keep your base alive. You do need a fair amount of controlling of your opponent's units to make sure that they don't run up your damage as fast. Because otherwise that's where you start to fall behind and struggle. But if you're able to keep your opponent's units in check, I mean, this deck can definitely win you a lot of games.
Yeah, there's specific cards in here for the ECL that you don't need. Like, for example, Gideon is not as good in the 30 health base version.
Yeah.
I don't need a Gideon in the 30 health base version, but being able to ECL Gideon out to kill something actually is really, really good, especially if you have a Kira on the board or some of these other things. And you can ECL Gideon out as long as he lives. You can then flip Kira and heal some of that damage.
Yeah.
I guess you heal all the damage and then you redistribute the damage back to him. But whatever. So, I don't know. Alex, what are your thoughts?
So as like the set continues, right, and more months go by, it tends to lean more towards control, right? Like sets start off generally aggro, and then it goes to control, and a new set's released, and it starts back over and over again. And my only problem with this is that it's not as good in control as other control decks. So as we move more towards slightly more popularity with control, this deck gets weaker in my mind. Like, if you brought this kind of deck to like my local store, which is basically all control, you just get smacked around. And obviously that's not like any other place around in Michigan, at least that I know of. But like, I'm sure most locals are not control heavy. But if you are going into like a store champ and the more popularity of different control decks come out, I think this one just gets weaker because your end game is 6 units. Right? It's Snoke and a couple of Avengers, Relentless, and a Devastator. And I also don't think that Avengers are particularly great endgame units. They're great win more stuff because when you drop them, start swinging with them, you start taking out their responses. I just don't think it's a good catch up end game card like a Devastator is. or maybe even a relentless.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you have those at the sideboard. And I think that if we are going to move to a more control heavy, you could tweak the deck to be that. I think that what I found is that even with it being somewhat more control heavy, as long as you can go through a lot of their base before you hit that 8 resource churn where they're dropping super laser blast, it's not as big of a deal. But that's I didn't throw the 30-point base in here. I don't know why I didn't do that, but I guess I did not throw that EC the 30-point base in there. But I do think the 30-point base does lean more towards an actual control style deck because it is a lot more blue. You have your Chilsons in there. And you have a higher quantity of like in-game pieces. So the blue version or the 30-point version feels more towards what you're talking about, Alex. And like maybe that's where the shift goes. This is great against aggro metas, but on aggro metas, it's got to shift closer towards that.
I'm actually kind of surprised that like is even particularly good against a lot of aggro stuff because it seems like it'd be okay, but I feel like if they flooded really early, it just falters.
Yeah, I don't know.
Also, yeah, I mean that's that. I don't have as much experience with this as I'm sure you do.
Yeah, well, and I mean, again, when we talk about what do we see topping events, this one tops more events in my opinion than the 30-point base does, but we also don't have like a super clear standard for it. But she is one of the top leaders right now. And, again, personally, maybe we don't feel that, or you don't feel that like it's the best deck out there, but I do think that the probability you're going to run into a Kira deck and understanding how to play against it is probably important as well. Because if you're going against this deck, you have to know how they're going to control your board.
Have you encountered a fair amount of like Kira just in your locals?
No, I'm the only one that runs Kira. My locals is Boba Green, Sabine's, now Lando. Lando's a new thing. And then we have some of the guys are running like Vader again, and Bosk and Tarkin. So my outside of the Vaders are almost all mid range and like and aggro decks. That's my whole life. Like running Pelp is like super not fun sometimes when they pull a Lando out or a Kylo and you're just like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do if you could just eke out all that damage super early.
Because I'm just like wondering how many people are actually going to bring like Kira to like a store showdown. Because we've had maybe like 2 or 3 players experiment with Kira around me, but like that doesn't work ever. So they're not really incentivized to bring it. So I'm just wondering if, like, for store showdowns, how many people are just going to rock a Kira deck?
Well, this weekend alone, there was at least 10 of them, according to the meta report that I found. So, cool. And that's short down. So people are playing it. I do think that it is it's becoming one of the more popular decks because people like in KTOD and people in WoW, they popularized this deck more than what I originally had, right? And I think that leans towards it. It does struggle against Pillage, but it also does not struggle against Pillage as much if you know how to play against Pillage, because it just feels like Han wastes his turn when he does that. So I'll tell you, when we talk about counters, like some of the good counters to this deck is Snoke, right? Snoke is a really good counter to this deck. And Saboteur is an amazing counter to this deck because Kira likes to shield everything, right? And if you are a little bit more space heavy, you can also take out Kira faster. And that's one of the bigger issues that she has. By the time you hit the overwhelming barrage churn, usually Sabine has gone through a lot of your base, or Kylo or something like that, and your overwhelming barrage is less effective because you're just not able to utilize it. But it is the interesting thing here is the Fell the Dragons over something like a Rival's Fall. And that's because by the time you hit that Rival's Fall turn, you're hopefully playing your Vaders, or you're using your Snokes. But Kira flipping one of the counters is takedown, right? Like takedown's a great counter to that. Yeah. Open fire is a great counter to Kira. You could play open fire and Kira goes, I'm no longer a Kira. I'm no longer here.
Mhm. Heck,
Every
even
single
some of the
time.
ambushes. Yeah.
Yeah. Every single time someone's flipped a Kira on me, it dies immediately in my response. Every single time.
But again, I think this version has less play into control, like you said, but I personally don't think if we look at the statistics from Gen Con, what planetary qualifiers are going to run into is you're going to run into this, and it's going to be a heavier aggro focused meta, unless all of a sudden people really want to run more like us control. Like it feels like we're not seeing the Sabines of the world drop off yet. Maybe next set, right? All right. Anything else on Kira? We move on to Han Blue. JJ, I know Han Blue has kind of been somewhat of a pet deck for you a little bit. Han Blue is popping up again. Han Blue is one of the higher response ones that we've seen coming out of Gen Con. It's done very well, probably because you can cheat cards out for cheaper. There is two versions of this. We're not going to talk a lot about the Force Bros version, right? That was I like this version better personally. Just personally, this is more my style of play. But the more popular one that we're seeing again is going to be this style where they look for discards and do those things. But JJ, tell us a little bit about the Han Blue deck and how this deck is played.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Humbled deck is definitely a very aggressive style deck, and it differs from Sabine in the way that it sends out a lot more units on the board in order to go and attack your opponent's bases at the cost of their health. So typically, you're looking at a lot of cards that tend to have 3 health or more, just so they can be eligible for Han's discounts using his ability by dealing damage to those particular units to go and deploy them faster. When you start using that mindset of just having a lot of bodies out on the board, you can take advantage of units that have when defeated, for instance Yoda in this particular deck here, that allows you to just getting that bonus when he's defeated on there. Really great. The other part of it is taking advantage of smuggle, because as you start depleting your hand for cards, being able to pull cards from your from resources to continue on that pressure becomes really good. So usually you'll see Cassian Andor being a staple. Tech is also really, really good cards to have in that there. And if you're able to get a lot of units out faster, your opponent starts having to play from behind, especially if they don't have any restore in their deck there. And if you start falling behind, then that's when you have some of the bigger units that can come out and start doing even more damage on there. You have units like K2SO, which is really great to use Han to come out there. Just being able to use his ability to deal additional damage when he falls is great. Having Sentinel units to also help delay your opponent from dealing damage back to you can be really good, especially if they have grit. Like Chewbacca, for instance, great pairing to go with Han Solo. And as long as you're able to control the amount of units out that you have on the board, as long as you can overwhelm your opponent with units, Han does very, very well at taking out your base.
All right, so kind of some of the play lines, right? You have your force throws for discard, you have K2s for discard, pillage for discard. I don't think this is an aggro deck, personally. I think this is more like a tempo mid-range deck, but you could cheat all these cards out early, and I think that's what makes this deck a little bit better. Alex, if you're sitting across the table from a deck like this in a non-pulp mind, how are you playing against something like this?
I know, that's the hard part. So Han has like a major drawback. If he uses his ability a lot, the lower health his units are. That's like why there's a lot of heavy discard, is to try to limit your options your opponent has to respond. But when you're taking damage, you can trade up with your units. So if you're playing something like going smaller aggro decks, or like going wide or so, you can trade up, and then he starts losing value. So like if you force Han to play like a mid-range kind of game, or like like, just like force him to lose tempo. You can do well, but his endgame's really good with like the triple Great Dragons, a couple Chewbacca's, and the triple Lukes, right? So like you have to, it's kind of a timer unless you are running like a hard control deck where you can actually just deal with his endgame. So it's really kind of like where you draw the line on being able to take out his units and being able to take out his base. It's kind of tricky, especially when if you just go straight like hard discard hand destruction stuff, your options are significantly more limited. And that's probably why, this deck does really well. But like you can rush it down. Like Han doesn't do much if he just kills units every turn.
Yeah. Even if he gets to the late game where he could play his Chewbacca or his Crate Dragon, like in Redemption is just like a fancy vigilance. That's all that's what I consider that stupid thing as. Is like most of the time you heal the 8 damage and then you just like let it sit there and then something kills it. Like, I don't know, I guess I play Pelp too, but
no, I almost never heal with my Redemption. To me, it's just like a big FU Space Sentinel. You're not playing space units right now, kind of thing. I like almost, unless I like desperately need it, I never heal with Redemption.
But yeah, once they get that Crate Dragon down, because they could put that down with 8 resources. Once they hit that, it becomes a little bit more of a slog fest. But if you could get it before then, the problem is their Lukes. You kill something there when their Lukes actually can come out, they could then return that back to you, and you're just screwed. And if you can't take Luke off the board, now he's healing all of a sudden for like an insane amount. But you know what the funny thing is, and I hate saying this, but my Kira deck, when I play against this Han Blue and they play Luke, I just usually hold a takedown for them, and I just play takedown.
Yeah.
Because that it only has 5 health, and it costs me 4 resources to kill your Luke. So sad to be you. You should not use Han to cheat out a Luke.
Yeah, see, like if you're forcing like trading up, that's where like the deck kind of falters.
Yes.
So as long as you can know that or try to do that, works pretty well.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to understand is really they're using their smuggle as more of a last ditch effort. But that's what more of that Cassian is and stuff like that. It's there, but it's a last ditch effort. Now, if we talk let's talk a little bit about the Forest Bros version in case you run into something like that. I haven't checked all the blue ones just because of the fact that I don't play Han Blue myself. My son plays Han Blue now. I personally just do not play them. I do think I think the Force version of this deck is a little bit more fun. But that's just me. But again, it still relies really heavily on that pillage piece, right? And the Force throws, the K2 SOs, and it's really about controlling their hand, so they can't do anything for turns. But even with this deck, you just have to watch out for the hand discards. And so if you're playing a Sabine deck, getting things down and minimizing what you're losing is the best thing that you can do. Right? Because you want to be able to play that. If you're playing as a Boba player and you have ramp, get your ramp in before they make you get rid of it. You can also, the other big thing against Han that a lot of people don't realize, or Rey as well, is you don't have to, if you're not an aggro deck, you don't have to have a turn 1 play specifically. You could keep that extra card if you don't need it. Especially when sometimes they play that Yoda on that turn 1. I like to claim just so I could kill the Yoda. I don't know why. Maybe that's like self-defeating because they get to draw a card out of it. But man, like you give me a 2 health Yoda, it's really hard not to just kill that thing. And they don't need it for the resource. It's there to set up that force throw. Is what it's typically there for. So
yeah.
Anything else about Han? I do think this is one of the more popular decks you're going to see. You know what works really well with Han too? Make an opening works really nicely against Han.
Yeah.
Which one do you like better?
In terms of which one do I think is better, has better playability?
Yeah.
Or which one do I like personally playing better?
Which one do you think is better, like performance wise?
This one we've seen, the first one we've seen perform better. I think this one I think the second one personally plays better and has a better flow to it, but that's just my opinion. But again, it fits more of my Help Red style, right? Except for with blue cards now. So I don't know. What about you then? If you're gonna ask me, I'll ask you. Which one do you think is better?
What about JJ's opinion? He skipped out on the last one.
All right, JJ, what's your opinion?
Honestly, I think this is probably a little bit better. You have a lot more options to help you deal with some of the control and aggro units on there that you can face off, like if face offs against a bean. I think aggro kind of beats this a little bit easier than some control decks. I honestly, this feels more like a mid-range deck, just if you're trying to classify it. But I think this version probably has the most amount of answers. I mean, there's different versions of the Hun deck that you could go into that a little more aggressive or a little more control. But I think this one just has performed the best out of all the different versions.
Which one are you talking about? The force one?
Sorry, the first one. Yeah, Han Blue. Yeah.
Okay.
With the force units. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, you're forcing me to be a tiebreaker. I like the force one more because it has more out of hand damage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is just slightly better. I like the open fires more. I like the forces with me being able to shield up so your unit doesn't die immediately, kind of thing. Although it's rough running a blue deck with no takedowns.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my opinion on that one.
All right. Well, let's move on to Boba Yellow. I think we've had some discussions about Boba Yellow in the past, right? You know, Alex, why don't you take us through this Boba Yellow deck?
You want me to read it off?
You don't have to read all of it off. I think we've gone over these decks quite a bit. I think the big thing is kind of highlighting what the key pieces in it, kind of like what we were doing a little bit earlier.
Sure. Okay. So this particular one, it's almost exactly the same as the other one, right? This one does not have Boba's armor. I think that's like the biggest difference between a couple of these decks. Is this one doesn't have Boba's armor. This particular one looks like it's more focused on bounty hunters. With the triple Toro in combination with the triple Zuckuss, triple Forlom, only double Boba Fett, and that one's kind of weird though. So they're very, very similar decks. I'm actually kind of just struggling to find that much of a difference other than one of them has Boba's armor, the other one has a new adventure. Well, more copies of a new adventure, I guess. Like they're both roughly the same. It's just your standard Boba Yellow mid-range. You know, you got the triple hotshot blasters. You obviously have the triple cunnings. They're all good. This one doesn't have Bodhi. It has triple Bodhi in the sideboard. The other one runs at least one Bodhi. And no Bazines in the sideboard either. So this is, I mean, it's just a pretty standard double yellow Boba deck that you've kind of seen everywhere.
Yeah. The big difference, really, like honestly, the bigger difference is like the Zuckasses and the Forloms. Like there's a few of them that are different in here, right? So one of them specifically focuses directly on that. But the key pieces, right, is we're now seeing these mercenary gunships come in because on turn 2 or turn 1 they're like super good because you can't steal them. Even if you ramp, you can still use them typically twice before you have to worry about somebody taking them. And I don't know, does somebody want to pay 4 resources for a 3/2 ship?
Yeah.
I would personally just rather kill it, but
yeah.
I don't know, we traitorous things all the time too. So I don't know, like as a pelt player, I have 100% stolen mercenary gunships before. And then claimed. But because that's all the resources you have. I don't know. I think, you know, this deck is what we seen. Bobby Sapphire brought about this deck, right? Set 1 as a way to kind of counter some of the Sabine. So this is a better counter to the Sabine aggro that we've seen. But now that we're into this new meta, now we're seeing this deck has evolved a little bit. People are now pulling one of the Boba Fetts out I think that's crazy, right? Like we've not seen that happen a lot before, and now all of a sudden Boba Fett's being pulled out. And I think that's kind of a different thing. You're not going face as fast as you were before. You're now looking to tempo your attacks so that the fact that you could come in and swing in with that Fett's fire spray is just so good. Especially because you have that new adventure in there sometimes to play against it. That Viper Projects, I don't remember those being in there, but maybe we covered that when we covered the Gen Con thing. So yeah. JJ, if you're looking to counter this, right? Like, so if you're sitting across the table from this, tell me what are your lines of play? And I think both of them, we could kind of generalize about both of them because they're close enough together. What are your lines of play here to defeat this?
Pressure your opponent. Your opponent, if they're focusing on playing a lot of control cards, they're not playing as many units on there. So if you can get a lot more of cheaper units out on the board, that forces your opponent to choose who are they going to attack. As long as you're putting damage onto their units or into their bases, you can force your opponent's hand to kind of stray away and focus more on getting the ground game up and probably give up some of their control cards that they have out there, maybe some waylays or anything. Definitely always keep in mind that your opponent will likely have cunning available, or they're going to wait to start. They'll wait till you play some of your more expensive units out to bring out like Cantina Bouncer, for instance, to return to your hand and basically make you waste. It's kind of difficult, right? Because a very patient Boba player will make you waste resources, and as long as they are making you waste resources, they have ways to trigger Boba's ability, taking a unit out from the board. As long as they have a couple of cheaper units out there that they can play using Boba's ability, can be really good. And then playing Boba himself can be very strong as well. So making sure that you have a ways to taking out some of their strong units as well, having a few takedowns, having a few Fell the Dragons out there, just to make sure that when they do deploy those strong units, that you have a way to take them out immediately, so that way you can continue the pressure on your end to go out there. Space presence is definitely really key as well, mainly because you do have to keep in mind that they will have that mercenary gunship out. They will deploy the fire spray eventually, and those units can absolutely terrorize the ground game if you have no answer to that side there. So having a balanced game both on the space side and on the ground side is the key to beating Boba. And if you're able to get more units out quicker than Boba, then you're going to win the game. Boba just can't keep up with two fronts. So
yeah, I think that Fett's fire spray is key to this deck, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Anything else about Boba Yellow?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you can like live through the point where like if you're playing like more of a late game, like Boba Yellow always kind of struggles a little bit with a late game. If you're able to make it to the late game, they don't really have too much of a finisher other than Fett's fire spray. But if you have a way of dealing with that, you should be okay. It does output a surprising amount of damage, but if you control his units, a lot of it, it's not like Surprise Strike's going to do anything. Even if he ambushes some of his units out, it's not like you can trade into him. Like, he's got a lot of sticky stuff, and that's why it's good. He can exhaust you. He's got the odd shot blasters. There's a lot of things that work pretty well in this deck. But if you manage to survive in the end game, it kind of falls apart.
Yep. All right, let's move on to Boba Green. We've definitely seen Boba Green start coming back up here a little bit. There is, again, two different versions of this. I picked the non-ECL one. You can run an ECL one. They're very similar, in my opinion, in how they're structured. With Boba Green coming back, like we see Sabine's pop up, right? Well, Boba Green helps take care of Sabine's. Well, you know what that means? It means Palp can come back and be very prominent, because Boba Green does not like to see a lot of Palpatines. So with this list, obviously you have the Bazines in there to stop and like pull cards out. You got Boba Fett's armor. You have McClunkies, which are hilarious. like they're out there. They're the ability to stop some of that Sabine power. I could play a Greedo claim, play McClunky next round, have extra cards. Like I could do all sorts of crazy different things with it. Because I'm not looking to just go face. They're high end cards, which they're now. This one has a little bit more than the Boba Yellow because they have their walkers or their balls or their Vaders. I don't know. I think we've even seen. What was the other card that I saw in there in one of them the other day? Man, I cannot remember. But this one, their top end goes up a little bit higher, for the aspect of it doesn't need fire sprays to just be the end game. But you could play fire sprays as your end game with this stupid deck because you have your commission, right, which lets you start to dig for those type of things, and bring it back. You can also play Pulp's Return to resurrect your stupid fire spray again, and then guess what? It comes out ready. So this deck can be this deck has some versatility to it, and it can be tweaked based on what you're running into and what you're playing against. The amount of ambush in this deck is usually very high. Bosk, I don't know. This one has a few less events. So Bosk is more in there just for the extra health and being able to trigger. But you do have the waylays, right? And that's one of the big things with Boba is you get your resource back, which we didn't talk a little bit about, I guess, during your yellow. And that's why yellow can become very important because you can tap their units down, get resources back after you kill something, yada, yada, yada. Boba Green is very similar, and that waylay allows you to get that extra resource back, and then your flip churn can just be just insane with this because you could play some stuff, waylay, and then get it back, and then next thing you know, now you're sitting there with Boba and a bunch of ready units. So this one's a little lighter. Again, on the super high top end though. So, but I don't know. Alex, what do you think? Do you think this one you need more top end, or is these walkers, mauls, invaders, and fire sprays enough top end to deal with some of the control stuff?
Yeah, I think between the Vaders, the mauls, and the walkers, I personally like Boba Green a lot more than Boba Yellow, just in general. But it does shore up enough of the late game that if you just play normally against like a soft control deck, you should still be able to take it at the end just by the sheer amount of damage you've done, and then able to have some more impactful units towards the end. Like you're not just solely depending on the 5 damage from fire spray. Now you could have like 7 from Maul, 6 from the walkers. You're healing, you're pulling more stuff out with Vader. You're just creating more threats, and that's harder for a control deck to deal with. Is if you have a lot of threats, and some of them are actually incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I like it a lot more. I definitely like that. If I would play a Boba deck, it would definitely be a Boba Green deck as opposed to Boba Yellow deck.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot more end game answers, right? Added on here when you start adding Invader, when you add in the Walker and stuff. So it feels like once it ramps up, it becomes a force to be reckoned with because you have a lot of units that can go in and deal a lot more damage. You're not relying as much on events in order to trigger Boba's ability. Just being able to have units out there that can absolutely go in and punish. And then use Boba's ability to recover resource can be absolutely really great for this deck because that just allows you to play even more units out there. As long as you have a lot of those bigger units that you can ramp up to towards the late game, it could be very, very tough for you to get through them. So if you're facing off against this particular deck, definitely having a few takedowns, a few cards that help you kill some of those larger health units on hand is absolutely key and necessary in order for you to make sure that you can not let the end game get out of control because they can easily come back and win the game with these large units that can just deal a lot of damage and just control the board.
So if you're sitting across from this, how are you attacking this type of a deck? Obviously the ECL version can be a little bit more powerful, but has less health. And this deck does not have healing until you hit that walker. So you have to get to that walker resource phase to be able to do that. But if you're sitting across from this, what are you looking to do? Are you worried about the Boba's armor, or are you more concerned about just trying to ensure that you're attacking their base fast enough to get the win out?
I think it's kind of like Boba Yellow, where if you just kind of control the units that they're playing, you can go slow enough that you can beat them out in the end game if that's like your control kind of strategy. If you're aggro, it is kind of rough because the McClunkies do a lot of damage. Greedos trade up really well. Like you can output a surprising amount of damage. But if you have like a ton of Sentinels, or if you manage to if you go wide enough, I guess, like if you force them to spend more time attacking your units than they are attacking your bases, I think that's a way to do really well against this.
Yeah. All right. Anything else about Boba Green? I do think that this is becoming a little bit more prominent again, and I think it's something that you can see or will see here in the upcoming future. Now, before we wrap up for the night, I am going to give a caveat that says there is more decks out there than what we showed you, and you are going to see other decks. For this segment, our goal is to just talk about the really popular ones. We have some other decks that we feel are something that becomes or can become more popular. There is, and I guess I can show you real quick, there is a website by the Garbage Rollers. They have some wonderful articles out there. They have their what they call their meta snapshot, where they kind of tell you about some of the popular ones. So like we didn't cover Bosk, we didn't cover Pelp, we didn't cover Han Yellow yet, or Kylo Yellow, right? There is some other decks out there that you could go to, and I've included a link in the description. You can actually talk through and go through, and you could click on each of these and find the deck for them if you would like. But I wanted to kind of point that out because when we talk about this, if you are sold that these are the only decks you're going to see, that's not true. These are a higher percent of the decks you'll see, but you're going to see other decks. And as we continue to provide you coverage towards Planetary Qualifiers, the goal was, here's the big main decks. Now we could talk a little bit more in depth about some of these other decks that might be on the rise, that you're going to run into that may be, I don't know, maybe something that you want to look out for. For example, Bosk Blue is the newer deck, and you're going to probably see that, even though I don't think people like playing that deck as much. I do think that you're going to start seeing that type of a deck start showing back up. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap up here?
No. I mean, that's pretty. We hit some of the big ones, Both flavors of the bean, I think, is a meaningful difference. Boba, I like Boba Green more. If you're running Boba Yellow, it depends if you're trying to go Boba Fett's armor or not. You got the Force with Han Blue, kind of cool. And then you got a Kira deck. I think those are pretty popular. None of those, well, I'm sure some of those might show up in my local meta, but it ain't gonna look like that. But we're all special over here. It's probably the lead in the water, So good times.